Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling the world of American red squirrels.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and might seem like a pretty simple topic, but we're going to be looking at some research that suggests that there's some surprising complexity to it.
Right.
And the research is by Sturry and Murray from the University of Idaho.
Okay.
And it really dives into the connection between a squirrel's territory size and its chances of survival.
Interesting.
Yeah, and one of the things I found really fascinating is they suggest that red squirrels with smaller territories are actually up to 23 times more likely to die.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, so why is that? Why does size matter so much for these squirrels?
Well, this research really digs into how territory size is linked to survival, and it turns out that a lot of it comes down to food.
Okay.
Red squirrels, they rely a lot on pine cones.
Right.
And so, those big middens that you sometimes see,
Yeah.
those are basically their storehouses for all the pine cones they've collected.
Yeah.
And squirrels with bigger territories, well, they've just got more space to collect and stash those cones.
Okay, so more space equals more food. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about, a bigger territory, meaning more ground
Right.
to cover more time that they're out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't that make them more vulnerable to predators like hawks?
You would think so, right? It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But the study actually found that it's the squirrels with smaller territories
No
who are
way.
more likely to be picked off by predators. It seems they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
They can risk spending more time out foraging to make up for the fact they've got limited resources in their smaller territory.
Right.
Or they risk not getting enough food,
Yeah.
both of which make them more vulnerable to predators.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for them.
It is.
They need enough space to gather all the food,
Right.
but they don't want to have so much space that they're constantly out in the open being a target.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's interesting is, unlike some other territorial species, red squirrels can't just adjust their territory size
Oh, really?
based on how much food is available or how much danger they perceive.
Interesting.
It's almost like they've got these territories that all fit together like a puzzle.
Yeah.
There are no overlaps, there are no gaps,
Mhm.
so they're kind of stuck with what they get, at least initially.
So they can't downsize if they feel too exposed or expand if they need more food.
Exactly.
They're just locked into this competition with their neighbors.
They are, and that raises another question.
Yeah.
If bigger is better for survival,
Yeah.
wouldn't you expect the biggest, strongest squirrels to always fight for the biggest territories?
Yeah, that's what I would think. Survival of the fittest, right?
You'd think so,
Yeah.
but that's not actually what they found.
Really?
The study actually found that size and strength didn't really have a big impact on who got the biggest territory.
Wow.
It seemed to be much more about just being in the right place at the right time when a territory opened up.
So a smaller squirrel could end up with a prime spot just by chance.
Exactly. It seems to really turn our ideas about how competition works on its head.
Yeah, it really does.
And so this suggests that for these squirrels, securing ANY territory is the priority, regardless of size,
Right.
because having a territory is crucial for survival and reproduction.
Right.
They'll take any space they can get rather than risk ending up with nothing.
Yeah, it's amazing how much chance seems to play into these squirrels' lives.
Yeah.
You could be the strongest, most experienced squirrel out there,
Here.
but if you're not in the right spot at the right time, well, you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how that impacts the overall population, right? Like,
Yeah.
what happens when food availability changes or the number of squirrels in an area fluctuates?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we're going to dig into a little bit deeper as we continue unpacking this research.
Yeah.
It seems like these seemingly simple little red squirrels have a lot to teach us about, the interplay of territory and survival,
Absolutely.
and this element of chance that really plays a big role.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
So we've talked about how important territory is for these red squirrels and how the size of their territory can really make a difference in their chances of survival.
Right.
But it seems like it's not a completely level playing field, right?
Yeah.
What happens if a squirrel does manage to survive the season? Even though they maybe started off with a not so great territory.
Well, the researchers actually noticed that squirrels who did survive,
Yeah.
they would often take the opportunity to expand their territory if a neighboring squirrel happened to die.
Oh, so they're always kind of looking for a chance to upgrade their real estate.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're constantly on the lookout for any opportunity to improve their situation.
So there's still some wiggle room there, but it
Right.
sounds like starting off with a larger territory just gives them that much of a head start.
Absolutely. It really increases their odds of making it to the next round.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to the whole predator thing. We talked about how smaller territories kind of force those squirrels to choose between foraging more and risking getting caught or, not getting enough food.
Right, right.
But is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I'm still kind of stuck on the idea that, like, a larger territory wouldn't automatically mean that they're more likely to encounter a predator.
Yeah.
Like, it just seems like more ground to cover would equal more
Mhm.
chances of running into a hawk or something.
It's a natural assumption, but you have to remember it's not just about the size of the territory.
Yeah.
It's about what's in it.
Right.
And those larger territories, they tend to have more of those pine cones. So the squirrels can gather and store enough food without having to constantly be venturing out and exposing themselves.
So it's like they can be more efficient with their foraging.
Exactly.
Almost like, if you have a really well-stocked pantry at home, you don't have to go to the grocery store as often.
I like that analogy.
So you're less likely to get caught in the rain.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the researchers, they actually did take body mass into account as a measure of how healthy and well-fed the squirrels were.
Right.
And even when they controlled for size and weight,
Hmm.
they found that territory size was still a really strong predictor of survival.
Interesting. So it really seems to be about that ability to forage efficiently and stay safe.
It does.
That makes a lot of sense. But it also makes me wonder, why don't we see this same pattern with other territorial animals?
Hmm.
Like, wouldn't they all want to grab as much space as they can?
Well, remember how red squirrels organize their territories?
Yeah, those puzzle pieces.
Exactly. Those puzzle piece territories mean that they can't really adjust their borders based on how much food is there.
Right.
Other species that have more flexible arrangements might not face the same pressure.
Right. So red squirrels are kind of stuck playing the hand they're dealt, at least in the beginning.
Yeah.
And if they're lucky enough to get a good spot, they're in good shape.
Yeah.
But if not, they have a tougher road ahead.
It seems that way, and this actually connects to another interesting point.
All right.
We often think that in territorial species, the strongest individuals will always get the best territories.
Right. Survival of the fittest.
Right. And that this leads to a more even distribution of resources.
Yeah.
But this study suggests that that's not always the case, at least not with red squirrels.
So it really comes down to luck of the draw.
It seems so.
Wow.
And this leads to a question that the researchers themselves raised.
Okay.
If those larger territories don't necessarily mean that they're going to have more offspring
Yep. Yeah.
or a better chance of passing on their genes,
Right.
why haven't they evolved to be less reliant on territory size?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
It is, isn't it?
You would think that natural selection would favor the squirrels that could thrive even with smaller territories.
Right, especially if those bigger territories are riskier in some ways.
Exactly.
It's a bit of a puzzle,
Yeah.
and the researchers suggested that this is definitely something that needs to be looked at more closely. It could be that there are benefits to a larger territory that we haven't discovered yet,
Right.
or maybe there are other factors involved that are sort of limiting the ways they can evolve different territorial strategies.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even with something that seems as simple as a red squirrel population,
Right.
there are all these layers of complexity that we're just starting to really understand.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another really critical question.
Okay.
If territory size is so vital for these red squirrels,
Yeah.
how will they be able to adapt as their environment changes?
That's a good question.
We've mentioned climate change and
Yeah.
that could impact food sources.
Mhm.
But what about things like deforestation and development?
Right, all these human impacts.
Exactly.
It seems like the stakes are pretty high,
They are.
especially if their survival is so tied to their territory, and those territories are becoming more scarce or fragmented.
Yeah. It is a lot to consider, and that's something we're going to explore further as we delve into the potential implications of this research
Okay.
and what it might mean for these squirrels in the long run.
We've been talking about, how important territory is for these red squirrels
Right.
and how, the size can really affect their survival.
Yeah.
And it's this balancing act, right? They
Mhm.
need enough space to find food,
Yeah.
but not so much that they're putting themselves in danger.
Exactly.
And it just makes me wonder, with all the changes that are happening in the environment,
Yeah.
how are these little guys going to handle it?
Right. It's a big question.
Climate change alone is already having a huge impact on so many different animals.
Absolutely. And this research is really important because it gives us a way to understand how vulnerable red squirrel populations might be to all these changes.
Okay.
Like, for example, with climate change.
Yeah.
We're seeing changes in the timing of the seasons,
Right.
more extreme weather events, and all of that can directly affect the pine cones. Right, because that's their main food source.
Exactly. It's like their lifeline.
Yeah.
And those middens, those big piles of pine cones?
Yeah.
That's like their savings account for the winter.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So if something happens that affects how many pine cones are produced or when they're produced,
Yeah.
that could be a real problem for the squirrels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like imagine a late frost comes along, wipes out a bunch of the cone crop.
Right.
Now, even a squirrel with a big territory might not have enough food.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point.
And then you've got the competition factor.
Yeah.
If climate change leads to less habitat or more fragmented habitat,
Right.
you're going to have more squirrels crowded into smaller areas. So even if there's a good year for pine cones,
Yeah.
if everybody's competing for them,
Yeah.
it might not be enough.
So it's like a double whammy then, right?
It is, yeah.
It's not just about having enough food.
Right.
It's also about having enough space to be able to gather it safely. Yeah, exactly. And, we can't forget about all the other ways that humans are impacting their habitat.
Yeah.
Things like deforestation, development.
Yeah.
Those puzzle piece territories don't really work so well when we start chopping up the forests.
Yeah, it's like we're making it even harder for them.
It does seem that way.
But knowing all this, is there anything we can do to help?
Well, that's the good news.
Okay.
This research actually gives us a lot of valuable information that we can use to try to protect these squirrels.
Okay, so how?
Well, for one thing,
Yeah.
we need to protect the forests that they live in.
Okay.
And we also need to create corridors
Yeah.
to connect fragmented areas.
Right, so that they can move between different areas.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then we can also think about ways to manage the forests
Yeah.
in a way that helps the trees produce more pine cones.
So it's not just about setting aside land.
Right.
We have to actively manage it as well.
We do. And research like this is really important for guiding those decisions.
Yeah.
Because the more we learn about how everything is connected in their ecosystem,
Yeah.
the better we can help them to adapt to all these changes.
It's amazing to think that even such small creatures
Yeah.
can teach us so much about resilience and the interconnectedness of everything.
Absolutely. Their challenges are really our challenges.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And their fate is connected to the choices we make.
This has been a really incredible deep dive.
It has.
And I think we've all learned a lot about these fascinating creatures.
I agree.
They may seem simple at first glance,
Right.
but their lives are surprisingly complex.
Yeah, they are.
And they're facing a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
But thankfully, we're starting to understand those challenges better. And hopefully we can use that knowledge to help them thrive.
I hope so too.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep asking questions and keep learning about the wonders of our natural world.